Hey there, fellow travelers. Welcome to the Tolkien Road, episode 382, or episode 16 in the Do Not Be Hasty Reckoning. I'm calling this one The Powers of the Ring. In this episode, we continue through Lord of the Rings, Book 1, Chapter 2, The Shadow of the Past. Greta?
Hey.
I'm going to need you to go ahead and come in on Saturday. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, great. You want to come in? I was expecting more banter from you. All right, wonderful.
Well, I don't know what to say.
Oh, that's fine. Well, you're here, so you did come in on Saturday.
It's
already.
just funny because, as a nurse, I work a lot of Saturdays.
Yeah.
So, having to go in on a Saturday is MBG. MBD? Yeah. MBD. No big deal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I know it's not like that for the typical 9-to-5ers. So...
Yeah.
Maybe consider your audience.
You say that with
time.
such condescension, those typical 9-to-5ers.
I don't mean it to be that way.
All good. All good. Before we begin, we'd like to give a double up air five to our amazing fellowship. Stick 'em up, fellowship. 3, 2, 1. Whoopsh. Very nice. Special thanks to this episode's executive producers, Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien, John R, KG, SaberSystems, and Jeremy D.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Thank you all so much. And also a shout out to those celebrating their fellowship anniversary in July of 2024. Carolyn S, Spencer M, Seb M, Matthew W, Werty, David of Pints with Jack, and Chris L. Thank you all so much for sticking with us over the years. In this episode of Do Not Be Hasty, we continue through the Shadow of the Past as Gandalf leads us on a deep dive into the history and lore of the Rings of Power. This section begins with the words, "Ah," said Gandalf, "that is a very long story," and ends with, "But at last I can carry on the story, I think." He does tell the story in between there, so it's not like anyway. We're still in the year.
On this episode of Do Not Be Hasty, we are covering 2 lines of text.
2 lines of text, and you just heard
Chapter
them.
2.
Now let's discuss those 2 lines of text for an hour. All right. Again, this section takes place in Frodo's 50th year, the Third Age, 3018, or Shire Reckoning, 1418. We pick up in Media Ray from the last section, continuing from Frodo's anguished cry, "How on earth did it come to me?"
Can you please tell me what does Media Ray mean?
Media Ray? Media Ray.
Media or what? Media?
Media Ray, yeah.
Media Ray. Like in the...
Yeah. Yeah, I'll show you. Here.
Okay.
Okay. In Media... Oh. Stop the virtual camera. I don't know what that was. All right. Let's do this. All right. In Media Ray. Technical term for the epic convention of beginning in the middle of things rather than at the very start of the story. So it's a like kind of a literary term or a storytelling term for meaning like you're picking up like right in the middle of a story.
Gotcha.
So I'm trying to think of like a good example of that, like in a common movie or something like that.
That's okay. I think I understand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we're not starting at the beginning.
You've seen stories where this is literally how the story begins. There's one I'm thinking of right now, which I just can't put my finger on it, but it's like very, I think it's one we really like. I just can't think of which one.
A movie?
It is. Yeah, like a movie.
That picks up in the middle of the story?
Yeah.
That starts in the middle of the story?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Or like the very first episode of Breaking Bad is like that because it shows him like out in the middle of the desert, and like he's in it, like shows him like getting ready to like fire at the police cars that are coming or whatever, like right in the middle of the story.
Oh, right, when he's wearing his underwear.
Yeah, and it's more of like it's not like how the story actually like it's just kind of a lead in to the actual episode because the episode tells how he got there. But
gotcha.
Anyway, yeah. That's what in Media Ray means. So
sounds very fancy.
Yes,
I like it.
Well, we are a little fancy here on the Tolkien Road.
A little fancy.
All right, so we're going to cover topics like the Black Years, the 1, the 3, the 7, the 9, and what their different powers bring to them. The fact that Sauron is seeking it, why it wasn't destroyed, why it passed out of knowledge and history, all these things. So that is the plan for this here episode.
It's a little history lesson.
That's right. That's right. History lesson led by Professor Gandalf. Professor Gandalf, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Right on. All right. So Gandalf says that is a very long story in terms of how it got to you, right, Frodo? The beginnings lie back in the Black Years, which only the lore masters now remember. If I were to tell you that tale, we should still be sitting here when spring had passed into winter. So it's a very long tale. So what years are referred to as the Black Years? Really, this goes to a certain period of the Second Age, right? So, and it really would be like the second half of the Second Age, because this was the period when Sauron had really, he around, starting at around the beginning of the second millennium of the Second Age, he had started to kind of execute on his big scheme of creating these rings of power. And right around the middle of that second millennium, he had actually a little later in the second millennium, he had really like declared all-out war against the elves at that point. And so pretty much from that time on, it was really this really dark period. Numenor declined during that period. It went from having kind of good rulers to having very evil rulers who kind of turned away from their friendship with the Blessed Realm. And so this period really is referred to as the Black Years. So it's about a 1500-year period of time in the Second Age. That's a long period of time to be living in a very dark period, Yes. So
yeah, I probably felt even longer too.
Yeah.
So
and then I wanted to just look at this word lore. I love the word lore, and it's one that we use quite a lot. But I think it's an interesting word, and I just wanted to kind of do a little deep dive on it here, since we're talking about it. This says it is a particular body of knowledge or tradition. So like the lore of baseball heroes. You're getting a nice little ad from SEMrush as we watch this on here. Apparently, hopefully they give us royalties. Something that is learned, a tradition, knowledge, or belief. Knowledge gained through a study or experience. So, but that particular body of knowledge or tradition, it also has another meaning: the space between the eye and bill in a bird, or the corresponding region in a reptile or fish. Apparently.
Oh, interesting.
But going down a little bit, let's see here. So the etymology. So for our particular usage of it, it comes from Middle English, from the Old English lehr, which is akin to the Old High German Lehre, doctrine, Old English Leornian, to learn, right? So it's really just like the things you would learn, right? The doctrine, right? The teaching. These are the things that have been handed down. So that's the idea of lore.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
All right. Gandalf says, always after a defeat and a respite, the shadow takes another shape and grows again. And I just got to thinking about it. Like, it's almost like he says it's this inevitable thing. Like it must be this way. Yeah. And so it's just kind of a deeper philosophical question. Must it be this way? Right. I don't have a good answer for that.
Yeah.
I think, I think as long as we are, living in the valley of the shadow of death, as long as we live in, in an evil, in a place where evil is done, the shadow will grow again, right? It will come back and continue to come back in different ways, unfortunately. Will there be an end to it? I sure hope so. I believe so, and I hope so. I believe so, and I hope so. So why Frodo and why now? Frodo says something. It's another really great line. Let's just go ahead and read this here. Greta, would you mind reading the highlighted portion right here?
Sure. I wish it need not have happened in my time, said Frodo. So do I, said Gandalf, and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. And already, Frodo, our time is beginning to look black. The enemy is fast becoming very strong. His plans are far from ripe, I think, but they are ripening. We shall be hard put to it. We should be very hard put to it, even if it were not for this dreadful chance.
Yeah, it's just such a great line. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us, right? That's all that any of us can really do.
Yeah, it's a great motto for life.
Yeah. And, I get the sense, I feel like this is one of those lines that just feels like it has a lot of autobiographical resonance, for it.
For Tolkien.
Yeah, when it coming from Tolkien. I get the sense that Tolkien would have known this feeling very deeply after World War I and World War II. It's like, why do we have to live through these incredibly destructive, evil wars, during my lifetime, right? He lost friends in World War I. and the lives of his children were threatened by World War II. And yeah, you just really like you can just almost feel like he knows what Frodo is feeling here in a way, right? Like again, I think Tolkien rarely, if ever, like was like, I'm going to express myself in this story. Like that wasn't how he wrote. But I think he put his own, a good writer won't like set out and be like, I'm going to express myself. They'll be like, I'm going to tell a good story, right? I'm going to tell a good story. But who they are will come out in that story.
Well, of course it will, right? Because that's who they are. That's what they know, right? So it's
you write what you know.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like inevitable.
And I just made a note. All we have to do to decide is what to do with the time that it's given us. Seems like all-time great wisdom.
Yeah, definitely something to live by for sure. It really kind of, it really encourages you to focus on what's within your control, right? And just to let the rest go as much as possible.
That's what it, I think for most of us, that's the way it should be.
Yeah, but it can be very challenging.
Absolutely, it can. All right. So Gandalf gets into kind of an explanation of the 1, the 3, the 7, and the 9. We learned that Sauron's hand never touched the 3, though Sauron taught Celebrimbor the art, the tech of the these rings of power. So
and 3 are the elven rings.
Right. Yeah.
Or the rings made
for the elven rings, right? So the 3, right? Sauron didn't have a part, so he couldn't, and again, you kind of think of this like, the sort of like theory and code that goes into writing, like certain programs, like, Apple like has like proprietary, everything about what they do is like proprietary. Like it's like very, sort of closed in on itself, and it has to be permissible, whereas like the PC world, everything's kind of open. The technology is kind of open source and all of that, with a lot of things. But you think about what happened here. So it's like Sauron kind of like came to Celebrimbor and is like, hey, I'm going to show you how to do this. And Sauron had ulterior motives in all this, right? He wanted to ensnare the elves. The elves were too smart for him. Nevertheless, Celebrimbor goes and makes the rings using the knowledge that Sauron had given him, the probably apprenticeship that Sauron had kind of imparted to him. And it's really interesting because if you go back and study the history of how the War of the Three Rings, which I call it, the first, the war where Sauron declared open war against the elves in the Second Age, Sauron's whole thing is like, they stole from me, right? They stole this technology from me, so I am in the right in attacking them and trying to get the 3 rings from them, right? So his whole motivation was to get these 3 rings from them, and he tried to paint himself to be like in the right about it. It
justifies action.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. Like when I remember, maybe a couple of years ago, I listened to the whole audiobook of The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, and it's super long, but it was fascinating, because you just think of like the Nazis are just like, they're like, I mean, they're like the closest thing to like human orcs, like you can imagine, right? Like they're just like, they're so awful, and you're like, but they tried to like conceal their awfulness, and they really like tried to play these like diplomatic games in a lot of cases, and be like, and play these like propaganda games as well, and be like, oh, we had to attack Poland because they attacked us first, and we had to attack, the Soviet Union because they attacked, and they would always have like their reasons, and they like try to make it sound like, but you knew like they didn't actually believe any of that, like they were just saying it like to it was a tactic, like it was a military tactic in of itself to like confuse the opposition and make, weaken the opposition's will to resist them, because they're like, well, maybe they did, maybe the Poland did attack them first or so. And nobody bought this stuff, but they still did it. And it's just interesting to me, like seeing Sauron do the same thing, with, it's like, you just want to control the elves, but you're using this as an excuse to say like you've been wronged so that you're justified. and it made me wonder, does Sauron really believe his own propaganda when it comes to this kind of thing?
It's not nearly as powerful if you don't. Do you think? Propaganda? Like, it's not
Well,
nearly
I think
as
at some
powerful
point
if you
people are
don't
too
believe it
wise. Like,
yourself.
did Hitler believe any of his own propaganda? Like, I don't think so. Like, like, I think there's certain people. I think lots of people will believe their own propaganda, or their side's propaganda. But I think there are certain people who are just too smart and they know they're just doing propaganda. Like, they're too their psychosis is like is so deep that they know like what they're doing. Like, they know what they're doing. It's just they're smart and psychotic or sociopathic enough to know like how they're operating.
And you're saying Sauron falls into that category.
I get the sense that he does. By that time he would have, it seems. Now it doesn't mean it doesn't mean he's so smart that he can't be wrong and he can't be fooled. And he can't miscalculate, because he does that, right? He does that eventually in this story, but yeah, it's interesting to me to think like about the operations of evil figures, like really powerful evil figures, in some cases, both in the real world and in the fictional world. But like, it's kind of a fascinating little, character. Again, like tying it back to Breaking Bad, like there are moments in Breaking Bad where you're like, I think Walter really believes what he's saying, but there's other moments where you're like, I think he knows he's full of it right now, but he's still saying the things that he's full, he's still making these arguments nevertheless,
I do think though that psychosis, when well advanced and has really taken hold of someone, it leads to delusion. And
true, yeah.
In that sense, I feel like that would make one more likely to believe their own propaganda, because it's just this whole delusional mindset.
Well, it is interesting, like, because as I said, like, I don't think Hitler like believed a lot of his own propaganda, especially like early on. I think he was like operating. He was like, okay, we'll say this, and that'll convince this group of people, about this. But of course, I don't believe any of that, right? But then later on in the war, like, there's a great movie that came out several years ago called Downfall, which is about like, it's like the last week of the Nazis' reign, and like, basically like the Russians have like encircled Berlin, and like Berlin's just getting shelled, and like it's a war zone, and the Nazis are so desperate that they have to like enlist like like boys and old men to like fight, because and Hitler, like they show these scenes with Hitler where he's just like, we're going to break out and we're going to send the Russians all the way back to Moscow, and everybody around him would, the generals around him were like, dude, we're toast. Like, if you want to live, you better just surrender right now, like, because it's over. But like, they won't say anything to him because they know that they'll get put to death at that point if if they say anything to him. So he does kind of fall into his like buying his own propaganda, and this is a fictionalized account of this particular episode in history, but I think there's probably some historical documentation to it. But he's like we're going to break out of this and blah, and so he is kind of like believing his own propaganda at that point. I don't know.
Well,
anyway,
it's inevitable.
Yeah.
When you preach something for so long, it like the ring, it begins to possess you.
Well, or it just becomes this like, it's this way you're used to dealing with other people and getting what you want, and so when you're hard pressed, all of a sudden, right? If you developed doing it this way when it was advantageous to you, and now you're hard pressed, it's like, you all of a sudden are buying into it yourself. Like, you become a victim of your own propaganda, right? So I don't know. It's an interesting little psychological phenomenon, for sure.
Doubt, for sure.
So yeah, that's the three. So the three do not have Sauron's direct imprint on them. The seven and the 9 do. The 7, it says 3 he has recovered, 4 others were consumed by dragons. This made me think, like, could Sauron control those dragons if he wanted to? Right? Could he control those the dragons that had consumed those 4 other rings? I don't know. Just something popped into my head as I was reading them, because the rings, had passed into these dragons, right?
And if the rings are Okay, so do like this, the rings that were the other rings, not the one ring, but do they all have similar qualities? Like, would these rings be invincible, say, to fire, like the one ring was or is?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Because I'm just wondering if they're invincible to fire, then they're most likely invincible to dragons' digestive tracts as well. But if not, I mean, the body. I'm trying to think about what would happen to metal if we digested it. Like, would we digest it?
We're not dragons for sure.
No, we're not. But I feel like
a dragon, I think it would probably melt inside of it, normal metal.
That's probably true because of the fire.
Inside.
Yeah. If it's not invincible to fire.
Yeah. Any dragon anatomists out there? Any dragon? Study the physiology of dragons.
If it's not invincible to fire, then it would have melted within the dragon, which I would think that means Sauron would not have any control over those dragons because the ring, in effect, is no longer.
No longer, yeah.
Like,
no longer
that doesn't exist.
Yeah, because like
really.
when the one ring is destroyed, it melts and dissolves. Yeah.
Exactly. In the fire of Mordor. Yeah.
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 I don't know. It's an interesting thought. Like, could he have controlled these dragons? That's one thing I'm like, why weren't there more dragons in Lord of the Rings, right? Like, there should have been, like, you have the Nazgul and the fell beasts that they ride, but, like, those aren't exactly dragons. You don't have any dragons on the level of, like, Smaug in Lord of the Rings. So, just an
Hence the
interesting
t-shirt, cool story. Needs more dragons.
Needs more dragons.
Needs more dragons.
Is that actually where that t-shirt came from, you think?
I mean,
yeah.
Maybe. Could have. Very well could have.
Lord of the Rings is a very cool story. But I think it could have used more dragons.
Yeah, it could have used more dragons.
All right, and then the 9, he gave to men and ensnared them. How so? I believe this was through the promise of immortality, which he gave in a way, right? Yeah. It's like, yes, you can be immortal if you wear these rings, right? You can have immortality. I didn't say that it would be happy immortality. I didn't say that you would never grow old, because that's essentially what happens, right? Is they get these rings and they don't die, but they just grow older and older and older until they become wraiths, right? They become almost ghosts, and
shadows,
and shadows, right? The invisibility overtakes them,
and then they're overtaken by Sauron, right? To do his bidding. Yeah.
And it says with the one, if Sauron recovers it, he will govern them all again, and all that has been wrought with them will be laid bare. Meaning, and this is in specific reference, I think, to the 3 rings. He says this: all that has been wrought with the 3 rings will be laid bare. This was an interesting little passage again. Like, I hadn't thought about it a lot before, but what does this mean? Well, I guess it's kind of like if you have the one ring, you suddenly think about the 3 rings being like like the iPhone of like the president of the United States and like Jeff Bezos and some other powerful, like really powerful rich figure, right? If you suddenly had something that could access all 3 of those persons' iPhones completely, right? How much power would you gain over them, right? How much power would you gain over so many other things? And you would have a lot more knowledge of the things that they had done, like over the course of their life. Not just on a personal level, but on a business level as well, right? So it's interesting, like, just to think about that power, right? If he regains the one ring, then he will, then all that has been wrought with the 3 rings will be laid bare.
I think he's saying all. I think he calls out the 3 rings, but he says that he will command them all again, wherever they be, even the 3. So I think he's saying that he'll command all of them, including the 3 elven rings, which is interesting because he himself didn't make them.
Yeah.
Right. He would still have control over them if he were to gain the one, if he were to recover the one ring.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think you're right. Yep. No, you're definitely right about it. He would have power over all. I think that's, and I think that's implied. So I don't disagree with that at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is interesting that he would also control the elven rings, even though he didn't make them.
Right.
Because they obviously, even though Celebrimbor was the one that made them, there's still something about them that enables them to be controlled by the One Ring.
Well, because Sauron taught,
it's his tech.
It's his tech, right? Yeah. Like it's his sort of magic that he taught to Celebrimbor.
Yeah.
With all of this.
Yep.
So this is why Sauron is seeking to recover the One Ring. He is seeking it now. Now he knows it has been found. I mean, this reads basically saying he thought the elves had destroyed it, right? For a long time, Sauron thought the elves had destroyed it, which would explain why it sat at the bottom of the Anduin for so long, right? Like no one was looking for it. You think over the course of 2,500 years, over the course of 3,000 years, Sauron, with all of his minions at his disposal, would have found the ring at some point,
so.
right?
And
Even at the bottom of the Anduin. I mean, it's you out and you see a big river, there's more to it than you find this little thing. I mean, it's like it's way more than a needle in a haystack. You're talking about just a large body of water. He didn't even know it was in a river though.
Which is very surprising to me.
Yeah.
Because I feel like he would. As long as it was still around, unless the water somehow inactivated it somehow.
Yeah.
I don't understand why he didn't know.
Yeah.
That it was still around. Because he was in it. He put some of himself in it. So, I don't know. It's just weird. Yeah,
it is kind of weird. And there's an interesting note we'll get to in the next episode to kind of consider in all of this. But
it's interesting to think, too. I'm sorry. I was just thinking about the relationship between fire and water, right? Water puts out fire. And if the ring is invincible to fire, maybe water acts on it in a different way.
So maybe like the water dampens its effect,
maybe
dampens the evil vibes or bat signals it puts off.
Yeah, because it couldn't be invincible to both fire and water.
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything in the lore about any of that, but it's an interesting thought. Maybe there may be something to that, and maybe because of of course, Olmo is and then Ase are like the Vala and the Maya of the waters around the world, and they're very powerful figures themselves. So maybe there is something in their powers that serve to conceal the ring for a long time, right? To hide it away. Again, there's no direct reference to any of that, but that's for those of you who have not read the Silmarillion and are not aware of kind of the different gods that govern the different different elements of the world. Olmo is the one that governs the waters of the world, with different lesser gods that kind of are under him and governing different aspects of the waters.
And the elves with their love of the water.
Yeah,
he was like a patron.
Yeah. So. Again, just really there's just so much room in all of this to think deeply about it, then just read over these little passages can become really little sentences can become very interesting all of a sudden.
Yeah.
All right. Well, why wasn't it destroyed? That's Frodo's question. It says the elves, and Gandalf says the elves and men of Westerness took it from him. So Westerness is just the kind of the, in that time, modern term for referring to Numenor. Tolkien Gateway says Westerness was a name in the common speech for the Isle of Numenor.
And it's Westerness, not. I always read it as Westernessy.
Yeah, the ending S, also an Elven S, was used in Romance literature for fictional lands that had partly franchised names. Tolkien noted that this name is Middle English, rare and of vague meaning, taken to mean Western lands in contrast to the East. So it's really just kind of a the men of the West, right?
Okay.
But I'm pretty sure it's not Westernessa or anything like that. I think it's just Westerness.
Okay.
But correct me if I'm wrong. Anybody comments? Yeah. Gil-galad and Elendil overthrew Sauron, though they perished in the deed. So Gil-galad being the high king of the elves at that time, and then Elendil being the first king of the realms in exile. So he was the kind of leader of the exiles of Numenor after the fall of Numenor. Elendil's son Isildur took it, and Sauron was vanquished and his spirit fled and was hidden for long years until his shadow took shape again in Mordor. So Sauron, it doesn't completely destroy Sauron. They don't completely destroy Sauron, but he becomes very weakened because he loses this ring and is vanquished by the forces of the last alliance of men and elves. So it passes out of knowledge and memory. Isildur takes it with him instead of throwing it into Mount Doom. It's lost in the Great River Anduin. There's actually a whole there's an account of this whole thing, the whole story of Isildur losing the ring and being killed. There's an account of it in Unfinished Tales that I've done an episode on before. I can't remember if we did it together, if I just did it by myself, but it's really great. Go back and find it on our podcast feed. Orcs saw him and killed him with arrows, and the ring. I feel like we're landing on the ring has a mind of its own. It would seem so. Does it call to the orcs in a way, right? Did it call to the orcs against Isildur? I think so. I think in some way, like they wouldn't. I don't think in a way they would have known, like, oh, there's the Master's ring, but in the way of, like, hey, look over here, right? Like kind of calling to them to say, like, kill this guy, right? That's trying to get away with it.
Well, we know it has, like, when we talk about, like, when we come to the Nazguls, right? We know the Nazguls are very sensitive to the ring, so it makes sense that orcs would be as well. Yeah, now orcs don't see, like, into the shadow realm like right. The ring wraiths do. Right, but it makes sense that it would be, because I mean, orcs are also a creation of Sauron, are they not? Or they're like, I know they're like disfigured or like,
well, really they're
right?
Like really their origins are with are from Morgoth. Yeah,
Morgoth. Okay, gotcha.
But yeah, no, I think it calls to evil things. Like I think it calls to evil things, right?
Yeah, it's just that whole idea when you open yourself up to something evil, right? Then you're going to be sensitive to other evil things.
Yeah. Of course, it says it slipped off his finger. It's kind of a passive thing to say. Did the ring intend to slip off his finger? Was it just because it was in the water and it just happened to slip off his finger? Again, my money's on the ring doing something. Intending, right? It can change.
Sure.
We know it can change shape, right? It can change size, not shape, but size.
Yep. Because it was mentioned even like when Gandalf and Bilbo were talking, right? Like, or I'm sorry, Frodo. Frodo mentions that how it just randomly would slip off his finger.
Yep.
Right? Which is why Frodo keeps it on a chain. So, yeah, we know that it has a mind of its own. Yeah.
All right. And then it's been 3,000 years since all of that happened. So the ring passed out of knowledge and legend. 3,000 years. It's like in the world of Middle-earth, we throw around those kinds of numbers, with some frequency. So it's like, 3,000 years, it's just the beginning of the first age or the beginning of the third age and the end of the third age. But that's such a long time, right? That's really such a long time in our terms as human beings.
Yep.
3,000 years ago for us was 1,000 years before the time of Christ. I think Israel was just being founded. I don't think Greece was really Greece at that time. You just go back and it's like, that's ancient. Like that's like so ancient, like we don't know. We don't have a lot of documentation about what was going on at that time in history. Right. 3,000 years is a lot of time to pass by. And if it weren't for the elves in this world, you'd think like, well, anything that happened back 3,000 years ago in mortal terms, like that's irrelevant. Like, it's like, oh, that's just ancient history, right? Like nothing, like that has no bearing. Obviously that ring is lost forever, right? It was lost a long time ago, right? It was lost within 100 years, right? But because elves, immortals, live in this world, there's more of a sense of like, well, there are people around, like actually who remember, who were around when all that happened, right? And they know that the ring hasn't been found because they were alive back then, and they were alive before that for a long time. So, interesting how the whole mortal and immortal kind of setup within the story works, like kind of plays itself out in a narrative sense.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. Very interesting.
Yeah. So, so I think that'll bring us to the end of this this section, this episode. Greta, what did I miss?
I think I don't think anything.
All right. Fantastic.
I think that's a wrap.
Well, it would seem that a heavy metal object lost beneath a great river would be forever lost. However, for Sauron's ring, it's almost as if it is biding its time for some greater and more malevolent purpose. In the next episode, Gandalf will reveal the tragic history of Sméagol and Daigle as they discover the ring after its long, watery slumber. Stay tuned.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please consider supporting us in one of the following ways. First, join the Fellowship of the Road by visiting patreon.com/TolkienRoad. When you join the Fellowship of the Road, it helps us to keep on evering on and lands you some cool perks along the way. Learn more at patreon.com/TolkienRoad.
Second, if you're watching, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and let us know what's on your mind in the comments below.
Finally, subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes or the platform of your choice. If you are a 5-star fan of the Tolkien Road, you can really help us out by heading over to iTunes or your preferred source for the show and dropping us a rating and review. When you do that, it helps get the word out about the Tolkien Road, which helps us to keep on evering on.
As always, keep the correspondence coming. We'll do our best to respond to you somehow and at some point. With Do Not Be Hasty, we'll let the mail pile up and then do a big mailbag episode at the end of each chapter. While we can't promise you that your mail will be read on air, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, so drop those comments and send those emails.
Finally, don't forget to stop by truemythspress.com for great merch like super stylin' and comfy Tolkien Road t-shirts, 2 Trees camper mugs, and signed copies of John's books, Tolkien's Requiem and Tolkien's Overture. Once again, that's truemythspress.com. Thanks for supporting our work with your purchase.
To close, as always, we'd like to thank our amazing fellowship. We know all of you half as well as we should like, and we've thanked less than half of you half as well as you deserve. Special thanks to the following: John R,
Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien,
KG,
Melkor 27,
SaberSystems,
Jeremy D,
Emilio P,
Jonathan D,
Richard K,
Paul D,
Julia,
Werty,
Chris B,
Toro 91,
Carolyn S,
Emiel K,
Brian O. II,
Jonathan R,
Matthew W,
Daniel D,
Harrison C,
Jason C,
Seb M,
Willbo Baggins,
Ms. Anonymous,
Andrew T,
Redhawk,
Shannon S,
Brian O. I,
Zeke F,
James L,
Chris L,
Asya V,
Ish of the Hammer,
Teresa C,
David of Pints with Jack.
and Eric B.
Thanks, guys.
Finally, thanks to all for watching and or listening. Until next time, the road goes ever on.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.